Hi, so Pascal, lovely to see you. I'm Lizzy. Today we have a great guest. Pascal has a great channel called Neutrality Studies, and himself is assistant professor at Kyoto University. So today we have no time differences, which is great. My audience had a lot of interest in you and your research. I am very grateful to welcome you as a guest. How are you today?
Thank you very much, Lizzie, for having me, and I'm very well. And I think this is the first time that a Japanese YouTuber invites me to talk. So thank you very much for a
Oh,
first.
thank you. Thank you very much. It's very hot today in Tokyo, and it must be quite hot in Kyoto as well, no?
Oh yes, it's horrible, and
Oh,
the air conditioner in my home just stopped working for.
oh,
But now it's back in action, so I think it's gonna
good.
be okay.
Oh, good. As well as our weather, the world situation and the politics is quite dramatically and hot.
Mhm.
How are you assessing the world situation right now that we are holding two big wars, Ukraine and Russia, as well as the Iran against Iran war right now, and maybe Gaza is still continuing, so maybe three. If you could quickly explain me how are you taking these two wars, why it happened, and who
Well,
is really benefiting from this? Hi, thank you for watching Lizzy channel. You can support me by subscribing this channel, press like and hypes, and please kindly share. I also have Substacks, PayPal, and online salon. Details are in below.
all of the warfare that we're seeing going on right now is very dramatic. I mean, the most dramatic one to me is the violence in Gaza. I do not usually call it a war because in a war you usually have two sides that kind of do the fighting. At the moment, what you have is just a genocide where one side is slaughtering the other one. And let's not forget what we are speaking today on July 22nd, 2026. Officially, we still have a ceasefire in Gaza, right? And Hamas is not, and the IDF are supposed to be in a ceasefire, and this is still, we are half a year beyond what Donald Trump announced as the Gaza Board of Peace and ceasefire, and still every single day the IDF is killing Palestinians, and we still every day get videos from them dropping bombs on tent cities, just tents in Gaza. This is, I mean, to me, this is not a war. This is a genocide. This is the extermination of a population, a very clearly defined population, with very very clear intent and purpose, because the people who are implementing it, the Zionists, the Israelis are, I mean, sorry, not all Israelis are Zionists, but the Zionist leaders of Israel are telling us that they want to get rid of these people, right? And that they're cleansing Gaza and whatnot, and that they will implement more in the future. So this to me is the most, on a human level, the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. But then we've got these other two wars. The Russo-Ukrainian / NATO war is now 4.5 years old, and it is. If we had to go into the details of this war, we have to talk about how it started. We have to talk about 2014, about what happened on the Maidan in Ukraine. We would have to talk about what happened in the build-up to 2022 and the escalations that took place, and also a lot of broken promises on the side of the West. And I belong to the people. I blame the West. Russia is the one that invaded. Russia is the one that on the 24th of February used its troops and invaded into sovereign territory of Ukraine and marched all the way to Kiev. But on the other side, we've got at least 10 years of the United States and a couple of European states too, but the US particularly, that has been working on militarizing Ukraine and trying to transform Ukraine from what it used to be, a bridge between East and West, kind of. I mean, the word itself, Ukraine, means borderland, from a borderland that is supposed to bridge two spaces into a battering ramp against Russia. And we have several US politicians on the record who said like, well, that's just what's going to happen. Russia has to swallow it, and Ukraine will be in NATO, and there will be NATO weaponry in Ukraine, and this weaponry will be, these missiles will be pointing toward Moscow, and there's nothing Moscow can do. They just have to accept that. Well, Moscow said, no, we're not going to accept that. And if necessary, we go to war. And then they went to war. And even when the whole thing had started in the early days in March 2022, the Russians immediately started negotiating with the Ukrainians. And they almost came to an agreement to end everything with preconditioned on the neutrality of Ukraine. They almost had it, and then it was sabotaged again by Western forces that said, that told Mr. Zelensky and the Ukrainian government, do not surrender, do not create a negotiated agreement, do fight, and then we will help you to break Russia. And we've ever since had the pipe dream of Western politicians, including Kaja Kallas, who said that, no, in the end, Russia will be broken up. We will break up Russia. We will win, and then Ukraine will win, and then Russia will be 15 other states. I mean, what happened to the Soviet Union in 1991 is what should happen to Russia in the 2020s, and then that's going to be a just peace, right? And Mr. Putin in The Hague and whatnot. So, and this kind of rhetoric and this kind of war goals and aims, they're still here. And they are just hardening the fronts on both sides. The Russians, for the longest time, were operating this war under the name of a special military operation. Now, a lot of people in the West are saying special military operation is just a euphemism. They just don't want to admit that it's a war. But yes and no. Very importantly, no, because the Russians are actually not fighting it as a war. They're fighting it as a military operation. And if you listen to what they are saying, they are telling you very clearly, look, we are not trying to conquer Ukraine. What we are trying to do is to secure these places and then secure a buffer zone. And we are doing so methodologically. We are trying to wear down NATO. That's what they did. It was a war of attrition for the longest time, with the goal of the Russians to say, like, okay, let's just destroy all the military equipment, not only of Ukraine, but also of NATO. And it kept coming, and the Russians kept firing at it and destroying it. And that strategy worked in the sense that now the whole NATO alliance is running short on weaponry. They are not out of weapons, but they're short of weapons. And you can see that when we then now look at the last war, which is in Iran, and how the Americans had to use divert a lot of weapons, a lot of missiles, a lot of HIMARS systems to the Gulf states. And they just don't have that then anymore in Ukraine. And now Ukraine is basically, it's naked. I mean, the Russian missiles and drones are hitting Kiev every single night now, and they have no more air defense. Air defense, they're out of it. What they still have is they're still able to produce their own drones and fire those at Moscow. And that is quite a big escalation as well, because, it's not, from the perspective of the Russians, this is not a proxy war anymore. This is a direct war with the NATO alliance, and NATO alliance members are manufacturing the drones and the missiles that are now killing Russians in Russia. And that just this week blew up a big warehouse, the Wildberries warehouse, which is Russia's version of Amazon. So a huge Amazon warehouse, Russian Amazon, burning down to the ground. From the Russian perspective, this doesn't look very much anymore like a proxy war. This looks like, Russia is now directly also under attack by NATO. Of course, NATO side says like, oh, but you started it. So now you're complaining? Ha ha ha. So now you get some of your own medicine. But that's a stupid reaction, because, the Russians, and I know because I talked to them on my channel, and I was in Russia just recently, what they're saying, like, well, if that's what it is, then why don't we just bomb Europe? If you really want to be bombed, then why don't we bomb you? We can fulfill your wishes. And this is the kind of thing where the Europeans are now working overtime to incentivize the Russians to bomb them as well. And once they do that, they will say like, the Russians are so evil. Now they're bombing us too. We always told you they are evil. So you're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. Instead of working on diplomacy and trying to de-escalate this stupidity, they're working on making it worse. And that is very frustrating to me. and I talk about that quite a lot. It's frustrating to a lot of others. That we are now basically, I mean, this war in Ukraine could become much, much worse. The one thing that's keeping it back, in my view, at the moment is, on the one hand, the Russians that are actually very, very disciplined of saying, like, no, we are not giving Europe what it wants. We're not going to escalate this. We will keep to the strategy, which is to a military victory in Ukraine. Over Ukraine, and then we decide what the post-Ukraine will look like, and we will form and shape this space ourselves. If we, the Russians, start bombing Europe, then Ukraine gets what it wants. The only chance Ukraine has at somehow getting out of this the way it was before is by the entirety of NATO joining. So the Russians are still sticking to their original strategy of saying, like, no, we will fight this war inside Ukraine, even if the Europeans are trying to bring the war to us, and we will lock it down there. Whether that will succeed or not is another question. But now the third theater in Iran is basically built around this the Zionist dream of the Israelis to have a big war with Iran and switch off the last and main enemy that they have, which is the Iranians that have been supporting the resistance against the settler colonial enterprise of Israel for the longest time. And they tried this with several US presidents, but it finally worked with President Trump, that he agreed, let's go to war with Iran, with the idea that it would take about 2 weeks until they would have a regime change, and then you bring in the son of the Shah, and then you celebrate victory, right? And everything will be Iran will flip and will not be an enemy, but an asset, and then we can use Iran in order to go and fight against Russia and against China, because the ultimate boss is China, right? That you need to fight against. But this has completely, utterly collapsed. The Iranians are much stronger and much more resilient. The Iranians have a very sophisticated defense strategy, and the Iranians are now destroying the foothold that the United States has in the Gulf states systematically, ruthlessly, very, very, very deliberately. I mean, they have a very deliberate strategy, which is an eye for an eye. So whenever the United States targets something in Iran, they will target something of equal value within the US alliance in the Gulf, with the goal of making sure that these US bases and assets are destroyed. And that the Gulf states at some point just kick out the Americans themselves. And we are getting closer to that kind of scenario. Just right now, the US strategy seems to be to double down instead of actually trying to change course. But the Iranians have a very clear strategy what they do about it. And we saw recently with this huge funeral for the slain leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, just how large the support inside Iran is for national defense. And this is a lot of people who are not very happy with the current government of Iran, but when attacked, you defend together. And I think that is something that both the US and Israel heavily underestimated. And now the Iranians and the Russians are working systematically on militarily degrading and destroying the military capabilities of the US/NATO war alliance. And this is new. This is genuinely new, that the United States and the West is not able to, have the upper hand, because before, the US lost wars before, like Vietnam, but there they lost against a guerrilla warfare. They lost in the woods. And, in the woods, what happens is that your forces are being drawn out, right? And then they can catch you. This time, they are losing against standing armies, standing Iranian army, standing Russian army, and these two armies, these two military systems, have a counter strategy to deal with the US and NATO as a system. That's new. The US always used to win these kind of wars, the symmetric wars.
Yes.
It used to lose asymmetric wars, but it used to win symmetric wars. And now we have a symmetric war, and it's not able to break it. Of course, the US could go to use its nuclear arsenal, but both Russia has an answer to that, its own nukes, and Iran has an answer to that, and that is the conventional second strike capability. Iran made it clear to say, like, even if you nuke us, we will still maintain the ability to shoot back. And you know what? Israel, we know what to hit. We know where Israel's nuclear power plant is. We know where its desalination plant is. And Israel needs 80% of its drinking water is from desalination.
Yeah.
If we hit that and destroy it with our conventional weapons, Israel will die. And we can do that. And we can also blow up the nuclear power plant. So we have nuclear capability without having nukes. And they made it clear that that's understood. So, there's still levels of escalation that could happen, but that luckily, at least for the moment, we're not going there. But especially when it comes to Iran, the Iranians made it very clear. They said, we're going to kick the Americans out. This is it. We're not taking this anymore. We are not negotiating anymore. 3 times we negotiated. 3 times you just fell us in the back and you tried to kill us again. We're not going to do this. You leave, and that's the only end we will accept. And now we are in a very hot symmetric war. Sorry, that's a very long answer.
Thank you very much. The newest the updates today is, I think, Saudi Arabia. Trump is now approving them to have not nuclear, but without interfering IEAE, they are going to have, how do you say, uranium enrichment in the Saudis. Isn't it?
Well, I mean, at this point, the United States is doing anything it can for Iran to actually make its own nuclear weapons as well. I mean, it's just dumb. It's just so dumb. If Saudi Arabia starts enriching and actually is working toward a nuclear bomb, I mean, Iran, there are people in Iran who want to make nuclear weapons, and their voices are just, at some point, they're just going to win in the national discourse. The United States killed the man who put a fatwa, a religious edict against nuclear weapons. So, it's so incredibly self-defeating that I really wonder if that's what the United States actually wants. But I just think that we're at the really, like, within the 250-year history of the United States, we're at the dumbest point of them. And also the Europeans, 500 years of European colonialism. When the Europeans left the European heartland and then went to the West, and they genocided North America, they genocided part of South America, they genocided Australia, replaced these places with white people. I mean, there's a reason why North America has people that look like me. It's because my ancestors went over there, killed everybody who was there before, and then set up their shop and started doing, like, continuing their business. So, the Europeans and the Americans, they are one civilizational kind of dough, and they work together. They work hand in hand. This is why the Gaza genocide is happening the way it is. This is why NATO is what it is. This is why they always they look like one heart and one soul when it comes to warfare. And yes, sometimes the Europeans don't want to go along with something, other times they do. But overall, you have time and again the pattern that the Europeans and the Americans help each other. Once the Spanish, when the Spanish were losing power, who took over the Spanish Empire was the Americans, right? They took over Cuba, they took over the Philippines, they just continued the colonial enterprise. And we see that in the history of Europe several times. I mean, the empires change, but the European or the white domination over the rest of the globe remains. They just hand over the staff from one to another. And that seems to be coming to an end. That seems to be, like, seriously changing now. And the ability of this Western colonial enterprise to push its will on everybody else is not working anymore. And this is a huge new world for the Euro-Americans to live in. And it seems to take a lot of time. So people like me are trying to point this out. People like Alexander Mercouris from the Duran, Alex Christoforou, or Glenn Deason, Lena Petrovna. I mean, a lot of us are trying to point that out. But we are, of course, being ignored and even talked down, because, again, to people who live within that little bubble, they're not even aware of all of this. Right? They're not even aware. I mean, my parents, if I told them that Switzerland is part of the colonial, European enterprise, they would say like, no, but Switzerland never had colonies. Yeah, but wherever you had a European colony, you also had Swiss people trading in the stuff that the primary colonizer didn't want to do. And the Swiss were part and parcel, just as all the others were part and parcel of a system, of a big system of global domination, of basically white people over everybody else. Again, look at the North American continent. So
when we talk about the globalism, it always gets into, let's say, UK and France, but it kind of the bottom, Switzerland is always get involved. Those financial system and so on. But what you were talking about, the colonialism, especially when we talk in Japan about those issues, we usually come back to eugenics way of thinking.
Well, eugenics was, of course, a very sad part of that colonial history, which, the Nazis...
So my point is, do you think this way of thinking is going away if the colonialism is still existing? And if it's, going away, then do you think this way of thinking is also reluctant?
Well, I don't think... I haven't re-encountered the idea of eugenics in a modern form yet, outside of the very crazy stuff like what Israel is doing in Gaza and Palestine and how they are talking about it. But I haven't found a kind of a systematic revival of eugenics.
Yeah.
The interesting thing at the moment is that the population demographics is a very difficult thing to predict, and we see how several countries have this problem of losing population naturally because they reached a very high development standard, so in this sense, what I see is a lot of countries thinking about how to not die out. So kind of the opposite of how to incentivize people to have children and to continue the population size, not so much the eugenics of the old days, of the bad old days. That one I so far I haven't found a thing that would make me think about it.
Thank you. Since we are talking about the Israel and Zionists, in my opinion, looking back the history, United Kingdom had imperialism. I forgot the name of it. The meeting or something early, I think 1905 or something. And then around that time, I think they were very fear of Muslims. And that's why I think I have a feeling that they decided to create Israel as a country so that Muslim doesn't go towards the United Kingdom, for instance. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, the
reason why we had a Balfour, Sykes-Picot, and those things at the same time, which doesn't make sense, that we usually talk about. And now I think Israel is becoming an issue. They're creating a problem in the whole world, Gaza war and so on. So I have a feeling that United Kingdom was behind this on a great game.
Well, I mean, it's all connected to each other, right? The United Kingdom, 1905 and earlier, was the last kind of great power, right? The one that was especially controlling the sea, the high sea, right? The at the end of the 19th century, the United Kingdom was the strongest navy and had the strongest merchant fleet. It was basically in charge of global trade as well. When the Brits said we are going to embargo a place, then it was really hard for everybody else to still do trade. And they used that power in the First World War. They used it in the Second World War and did kind of crack down on their enemy shipping very, very much. The power of the United Kingdom was running out toward the beginning of the 20th century, and then transitioned, of course, to become the power that the United States more or less inherited, and also the two world wars, and especially the second one was basically this handover moment when, among other things, Israel was handed over. It's absolutely correct. It was the UK that kind of committed some territory that it ruled over, the Palestine, the mandate there, in that it basically grabbed out of the hands of the Ottoman Empire, right, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and then it handed that to basically the Zionist cause. And I keep talking about Zionism because it's very important to me to understand the difference between Zionism and the Jews. The Jews are a lovely religion that is like the Christians and the Muslims, has a faith and a dogma and everything, and they're in a lot of different countries, different places. Zionism is the political ideology of a group of people that there should be a country of the Jews for the Jews and ruled by the Jews, and that political ideology is shared by Jews and by Christians and a couple of Muslims, actually. But there are Jewish Zionists and there are Christian Zionists. They want this goal of a Jewish state for the Jews only, for different reasons, but they both want that. And they've been working for more than 100 years, for 250 years, 300 years, to realize that idea that there should be a Jewish homeland for the Jews only. And one of the people was Sykes-Picot and Balfour, that said, like, okay, let's start this. Let's give these Jewish groups a place that they can administer themselves. And upon that, a lot was built, and a lot of this was also built on terrorism. The first kind of Jewish militarist organizations in Palestine were highly militant, and they blew up things. They killed also British citizens in Palestine. Terrorism was part and parcel of the approach. And it yielded, in the end, the official state of Israel, the way we have it today, although with constantly expanding borders. The only state that tries to grow and doesn't define its borders and doesn't have a constitution in which its borders would be defined is Israel. Israel never ever says where its own borders are. It just keeps claiming that nobody else wants to recognize Israel, but the one who really doesn't recognize Israel's borders is Israel itself, because it never defines borders. It just constantly lays claim on more land, including the Golan Heights, which officially, of course, belong to Syria, including the occupied territories of Palestine, including, of course, large parts now of Gaza. And the question to them is always like, what do we incorporate, what do we officially annex and what not, and then leave it a gray area, and then just call it a safe zone or whatnot. And then they have a long strategy of expanding territory now. So the problem is that this is basically a very unhealthy 19th century construct of ethnic nationalism. You need to be Jewish in order to be part of the Jewish homeland, and we see these policies, right? Any Jew in the world is allowed to go to Israel and say, like, I want to live here because this is my right of return, whereas anyone who used to live in those lands before 48 and is not a Jew has no right to come back whatsoever. So it's like this kind of nationalist idea that only if you belong to the in-group, then you have rights, but the in-group isn't defined by who lived here, it's defined by your ethnicity, or, well, in this case, religion. And that is a very, very toxic kind of idea. It's very different from, let's say, Russia's way of defining who's Russian, which is the people who live on the land, and it doesn't really matter what religion you are. Yeah. So and this kind of Zionism and this has bred a lot of violence until now. And we're seeing the outcome of that in 2026, and in a sense also kind of the high time of it. I do think that this has to, in one way or another, calm down again, but at least for the time being, it seems that violence is the only recipe that the alliance has to offer.
What do you think in October election, Netanyahu can still stay there? It's still early stage to expect anything, but we still have 3 months.
It's difficult to say. The problem is that, even if Netanyahu loses power and his government is ousted and he goes to prison because those internal judicial processes will continue, I don't think that the foreign policy of Israel would change. The genocide is still very popular among the general population. There's a lot of people who disagree with the government because they think it's not using enough force, that it should use more violence in order to get its way. So I do not harbor much hope that a change of government in Israel would lead to a change of foreign policy.
Hi, thank you for watching Lizzy channel. You can support me by subscribing this channel, press like and hypes, and please kindly share. I also have Substacks, PayPal, and online salon. Details are in below. Going back to Ukraine things, the updates maybe today, yesterday, is the resignation of the defense minister Fedorov. He lost his position, and he was famous for drones. So I have a feeling that Ukraine has lost the drone war. And
well, I mean, Ukraine is first and foremost losing the ground war. We are seeing that right now, and the Western media for quite a while now tried to pretend that it's Russia that's losing everything, but that's basically because they only looked at the fact that Russia had explosions on Russian territory, right, and drones were getting through. But on the ground, it's quite clear that the Russians are systematically advancing bit by bit, the way they have done that for the last basically 3 years, because there was at least 3 different phases of the war. The initial try of push into Ukraine, where they tried to force them to a neutrality agreement, which then failed. Then they retreated in order to regroup and reorganize themselves and just not be completely crushed. And then once they were reorganized, they went into this systematic war of attrition, where the whole goal was, as I said earlier, to just grind down the NATO alliance and the weaponry. And then the fourth step is then what started about a year ago, that they started advancing step by step systematically, because still you do attrition, you destroy the other one, you try to not have too many losses on your side, but you then go forward and you start creating depth, but slowly, because if you do it fast, I mean, you risk to overstretch yourself and destroy everything you've gained. So they do this very systematically. And that is continuing, and that is succeeding. The Ukrainians Mr. Fedorov managed to create enough drones and enough weaponry to actually hurt Russia. That is true. But the thing is, yes, it hurts Russia, but it doesn't change the logic of the war. The military keeps plowing on. There's no this drone warfare didn't manage to actually destroy anything important in the industrial setup of Russia in order to prevent them from advancing on the battlefield. Everything they need, including the oil, including the minerals, including all the men and the industrial power to produce what they need in order to give their military the weaponry that they need to advance, everything is still in place. So all of that is continuing. And what they managed to do is to create public perception in the West that Russia is being bombed and is losing. Yeah, sure. But that's not what's going to define what the Russian military does. And the Russian military does what it decided to do, and that's advancing and then implementing a military a status, a fact, just a fact of where they're going to occupy Ukraine and how they're going to occupy Ukraine, and then they will decide what happens with those plots of land that they hold, right? And that's not changing. So the question really to me at the moment is, how long will it take until Russia basically is close to Kiev, or actually now what we're seeing is that they're after Odessa. I think it's very very clear now that they're trying to they include Odessa in the war goals. And it is going to be horrible for Odessa, of course, because it's going to be a lot of destruction again. But it seems to me that the Russians want to connect everything up to Transnistria under the land that they will consolidate. And the way it goes right now, there's nothing that Ukraine can do against this. Again, because the strategy is very, very clear, and the tactics too. And I do not see that the Russians are changing this, not even due to the provocations on the other side. So it's a very grim outlook for Ukraine, and it's of course absolutely horrible for all of the men who have to go and die in this meat grinder. And we see a lot of these horrible pictures of Ukrainian men being dragged off the streets of Kiev and the other cities, and then probably sent to the front lines just to die. It's a horrible slaughter, and I belong to the people who keep accusing Western countries for letting this happen and not negotiating with the Russians, because you can negotiate with the Russians. The one thing I am absolutely 100% certain is that negotiation is what they wanted and what they were willing to do, and that the West just never took serious. So I blame a lot of this on the Europeans for not actually negotiating. Russia invaded, yes, and Russia is doing the killing, but we are well beyond the point where you can just say this is all just Russian evilness. On the contrary, this is a huge kind of spiral.
But before 2022, Ukrainians were killing Russians in their regions. So, that's
and Ukrainians were killing Ukrainians. I mean, in the Donbas, 14,000 people died between 2014 and 2022, to a large part killed by Ukrainian soldiers who were shelling the Donbas, right? And they were shooting at their own people. But again, we have a similar problem like like in Israel. They want the land, but not necessarily the people. The Ukrainians do want the Donbas, but they don't want the Russian-speaking part of the Donbas, and the ones that do not agree with these nationalist ideology that then was built up in Kiev ever since 2014. It's very, very tragic. And what's sad and tragic to me is that, within us, the research community, a lot of these mechanisms and a lot of these things were actually well understood. And people like John Mearsheimer and Jeffrey Sachs have been warning for decades. And the last US ambassador to the Soviet Union, Jack Matlock, has been saying since the 1990s, this is going to be horrible. And, so many Western analysts and observers have been saying this will end in war. Stop it. They didn't stop it. It became a war. And now the very people who didn't stop are the ones telling us that, look, we always told you the Russians are evil. They will fight a war. It's like, that's exactly what you could predict. That's why, unfortunately, my personal conclusion is, as weird as it sounds, but there are people on this planet, they do want war. They want war as a means of breaking the other one, and the most clever ones are the ones who are able to pin it on the other one. Right? You need to blame the other one in order to mobilize your own population to go and fight that war. This is why Hitler pretended to be attacked by Poland, right? Because you need to blame the other one in order to have a good story at home. And the West is a master in telling the story of the other one was evil and attacked us, therefore we need to go and defend ourselves. Which is why every aggressive war that the West fought, and most of its wars are aggressive, it fights under the banner of self-defense. It goes in self-defense in Afghanistan, it goes in self-defense in Iraq, it goes in self-defense in Iran. I mean, they're literally calling, whenever they do strikes in Iran, the US military bombs stuff in Iran, they're calling it self-defense strikes. Because those evil Iranians, they use their Iranian territory to target us, therefore we are defending us by bombing them first. Ha! That's self-defense for you. It's horrible, and it's very twisted, and it's very hypocritical, but it's a reality. It's how things work, unfortunately.
Okay, time is coming up. Thank you very much, Pascal. I hope to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Lizzy.
It's all just like